So it's my great pleasure to hand over to Julie.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, but I think in spite of the accent, I have now done my citizenship test.
Whoa.
So I defy anyone here to ask me a question. I've read the book, I studied the book. So that's probably the last time I've heard that particular introduction. Now, thanks very much for inviting me today. It's quite a nice topic to be asked to speak about. But unfortunately, I haven't got a prescription. In fact, I really wish I knew the answer. I have a few reflections which are really aimed at taking into the discussion for the rest of the day. But the reason why I don't have the answer is because of what happened during the LASPO campaign. Not that I thought I had the answer then. But also thanks to you, Steve, for your introductory remarks. I mean, Steve and I didn't get together beforehand, but fortunately his remarks feed directly into what I'm going to say. I hope that it's a matter of great minds and not fools, Steve, so make your own analogy. So let's look first of all at the LASPO campaign. I think it's a great example of how the sector came together really well. We had cross-party support, not all of one party, but there was support there. We had cross-sector support. There were over 5,000 responses. There were 14 government defeats, as you've said, and we did secure some very important amendments, not least of which is the one that Steve said of being able to bring something back into legal aid, because in fact that was one of the most dangerous parts in that bill initially, that you could only take out. The second most dangerous part we lost on, which was the gateway, and it's being implemented as we speak. But in spite of that, I think it's fair to say that we lost that campaign. It wasn't an abject failure, but it was a failure. Now, there were many factors in why we weren't more successful. And I think one of the key factors was that we never succeeded in the current environment in winning support for the people that we serve. And we know this is the case because the poor, the vulnerable, the disenfranchised, indeed the unemployed, indeed migrants are now demonised and are seen as the source of their own problems. We didn't succeed in winning that argument. We didn't really succeed in the argument of the vital importance for all of society, for each of us, in the importance of a functioning justice system, and that all its citizens, particularly those that are now demonised, also should be able to assert their rights. We said it, those of us who understood it accepted that, but across the House that wasn't accepted. We importantly failed to impact or change the discourse on disputes. If you remember, the prevailing discourse was that most disputes, particularly in our area of law, are just really feathering our own pockets, either lawyers' pockets or individuals, even if it is just getting a little bit more of their welfare entitlements. We didn't change that. And most importantly, we didn't manage to shift the argument that it's not their own fault. It was across the board in some ways. These people are people who've created this problem for themselves in one way or another. And I'm talking about that a lot because I think in any future campaign, this shirkers debate is going to be fundamental to how we move forward and what successes we may be able to have. As Steve mentioned, what's left is the absolute minimum of what's required by European law, and if they get out of it in 2017, that might be gone as well. So my initial thought is that in spite of some excellent and tireless campaigning, because we were arguing a rights agenda, a justice agenda, and a rules of law agenda, it just didn't cut it. because what we were doing in arguing that agenda and in arguing a very rational approach was that we were accepting the cuts paradigm. You know, a lot of our evidence was where to make a better cut, who else to cut, how to get savings, where else to get money. And in taking on that paradigm and in arguing that, we ignored what the real fight was. And the real fight is a very ideologically driven agenda of this government to remove the responsibility of government as a safety net, and it's about small government. It's about us being responsible for ourselves and returning to those Victorian charitable values. That is what we really need to start looking on, because we're never going to get anywhere while that is the main paradigm. The second reason we didn't get anywhere is because in keeping some of the key areas in the legal aid bill, like welfare reform, immigration and employment, it was putting in place obstacles to the other government reforms. Now, you said that this was a bit of conspiracy theory, Steve, but it's not. In fact, many here, or some of us here in this room, were there when Nick heard, I think Yvonne, you heard Nick say that the reason immigration has been moved from the bill is because government wants to control immigration. So why are they going to give legal aid for it? And the same can be said about welfare reform and employment. They're very upfront about this, but somehow or other, you know, we say, oh, we're being a bit paranoid. No, we're not. That's what it's about. The second thing, so that's the LASPO. They're the key points. We need to think about the broader government agenda, and we need to really intervene in this shirkers debate. The second reflection I want to make is on the advice fund. So as Steve mentioned, there's £114 million has been taken out of social welfare law, yet they've put back in 67 million. Now, that's a success. It means that we succeeded in getting the government to understand the impact of these cuts on the advice sector. Half of the money comes from government, the other half from the lotteries. Now, that's another success, because big lottery funds said they were never going to fund the advice sector again. I'm not quite sure why, but that was their view. And so they decided they were prevailed upon, lobbied effectively, to give to this fund. But the tragedy of this fund is that 67 million, half of the money that's being taken out, is about to be squandered. It's about to be squandered, and I use that word not sort of haphazardly, not because I don't think everyone's putting good proposals or worthwhile proposals, and it's not because I expect that the projects will not be implemented successfully. They'll be good projects. But the tragedy is that this fund is aimed at changing our organisations. It is not aimed at the people we serve or the money that's taken out. And why is that a tragedy? It's because it goes back to my earlier comment. It's playing directly into this government's ideological shift that it's up to us to be the safety net, and they're going to help us for a couple of years to make these transformational changes so we develop new income streams. We charge anyone who can possibly borrow from their family and friends, and we keep it going, and they can wipe their hands of it. That's why that fund is a real tragedy. Furthermore, it's also a real witness of our weakness as a sector, and I think we have to take full responsibility for this, and I in particular need to share some of this blame. And that is because the government's single most important transformation they want, the way we have to change ourselves, isn't just charging clients, but rather it's what they believe they have to force us to work together. Now, this meeting here today shows that actually they don't need to, but their view is that we don't do it, and we don't do it effectively. And my evidence for saying this is because I was asked, and also why I feel I'm part of the problem here, because I got direct access to lobbying about this fund. And in one of those sessions, right at the end, I was asked this: whether or not I thought the reason for the failure of advice agencies to cooperate at a local level was as a result of the animosity, that was the word used, between the agencies at a national level. Now, this is what Cabinet thinks about the advice sector, that we're all fighting each other, that we hate each other. Now, why would they have this view? Well, on the one hand, it's not entirely wrong, because, as you know, when it comes to any funding opportunities, we're like those hordes belting in the door on the Boxing Day of sales. You know, we're elbows and all, we're all grabbing, yeah, I want that one. And, you know, it's not for reasons of greed or self-interest. It comes out of our commitment to our clients. But we never manage to get that across. It's like we just want bigger wages, or we're self-aggrandising or something like that. So that's a failure. But also, and more importantly, at a national level, we missed an absolutely vital opportunity to show a unified vision of the advice sector to government. Instead, what happened was we all went along, we told tales of the other, we said, give it to us, we'll look after the whole lot of it beautifully for you. You know, we'll give a little bit to them. This happened with agencies like mine and every one of us again and again. Now, we thought we were representing our own little slice of the sector, but in fact, what we achieved in doing was having a fund that looks like this, when we should have shaped that fund, and it should be our money now, and when I say our, I mean our clients' money to deliver services. And so I dwell on that because today we're coming together to think how we can do it better and where we can go to from here. And I think the key message is that our campaign, whatever it can be, cannot be about, and using the words, funding for free advice. The Advice Fund tells us that. It'll be seen as self-serving, it's what pulls us apart, and it plays to our weaknesses. Now, in saying that, I'm not saying that in some way we don't have to fight for funding, because we do. In fact, if we don't have it, we can't continue our work. But what we have to do is look at what we do brilliantly, and this is what we do brilliantly, what we're doing here today. We're here on a Saturday, for God's sake. We're all up bright and early in the morning. We actually do work well together, and we work well together when we're talking about our clients. That's when we speak with one voice. We actually know the solutions. We're each very complementary in our work. There isn't the overlap that everyone says there is. For God's sake, there's so much need that even if we were all doing the same thing, there'd still be more need. You know, that's the dirty great lie here, that we're all doing the same thing. And we know that. We innovate. That's why the government wants to give us money. They appreciate this work. And in fact, we're not the cheapest out there. We know that from these funding bids. We're actually slightly more expensive. But that's because we do quality. And the government wants that as well. So we innovate, we actually are efficient. Bloody hell, we know how to get blood out of a stone. That's what we do every single day. And when we talk about the people we serve, we're passionate and we have one voice. So they are the building blocks for whatever this future campaign is. But what do we need to do? I think maybe the key campaign to think of here today is the Madeleine McCann campaign. Now that's a surprise, but if you think about it, bloody hell, that family got £4 million in the middle of all the biggest cuts. And that was only to review the evidence. You know, nothing's even come out of that. And why? Because they managed to pull on the heartstrings. And, you know, I personally am terrified of that happening to my children or their children. It's not that I don't support that, but it's an indication of what works in a campaign. They might say there's no money around, but there's always money if you can pull on those heartstrings. So we have to have emotional triggers, and once we've activated that trigger, that's when we bring in the evidence. evidence alone doesn't do it for you, but without evidence, we also don't get anywhere. So it's the combination. Activate the emotions, then bring in the evidence. Secondly, our target or our aim cannot be to influence. Influence is a waste of time. And I'll tell you why. This is an Australian example, even though I said I'm not Australian anymore. In the 1970s, a survey was done on whether or not people thought men should do the housework. And they found that only 5% believed that men should contribute to household chores. And in fact, only 1.5% of people actually, or men actually, did any housework. At the end of the 1980s, after the decade of women, etc., the government repeated that same survey to see what influence they'd had. And they discovered that, in fact, a huge 85% now thought that men should do the housework. However, only a staggering 5% had actually started doing it. And that is my example of why attitude does not equal change. There was enormous influence. One could say that was a brilliant campaign, but at the end of the day, we only had one group of people still doing the housework. So in thinking about our future campaign, we have to say, what is the action that we want? What is the change? What is the behaviour shift? Next, we have to say, who are our allies? Who is inside that power circle that will make that change? And then we have to look at the government today, because I'm in awe of them. The rioters, they were jailed, nothing changed. The unions sidelined. The IMF and the World Bank poo-pooed. Not Europe, not the USA, not judges, not church leaders, certainly not the Liberal Democrats, and not the voters. Because remember, less than 1 in 2 people voted for the government. They're not a popular government. None of those people managed to change this government. And not only that, David Cameron doesn't change this government. He's the front man, but as we know, he's not the ideas man. So, who are our targets if we can stand it? Well, of course, there's Ian Duncan Smith. He had a road to Damascus experience. We may not believe in his motives, but I do think he is very genuine in what he's trying to do. I just wish he had better ideas. And perhaps we can furnish him with some. There's Michael Gove, but he's one step too far for me, but maybe some of you others run for Michael Gove. As for George Osborne and Boris Johnson, again, you'll have to draw straws for them. There's the big party donors. I mean, there's Lord Ashcroft. He really does make a difference. And I may be able to call on my Australian connections with Linton Crosby, who is their strategist. That guy is a clever, nasty piece of work. But he is the one telling them what they can do. And he really is very clever. And he really targets marginal voters. That is his success. So we need to think cleverly about this lot. But who else? Who else is there that sets their agenda? We must think of who our surprising and different allies might be, and who it is that we can work with that will see our value. Is there some media apart from the Sun and the Daily Mail, or do we have to accept that that's where we have to go for? Importantly, perhaps it is that we shouldn't run a media campaign. Perhaps it is that our clients are such that we'll never get public support. Perhaps it's strictly a backdoor Linton Crosby type campaign. We really have to make serious judgments about this. And next we need to say what will be different in 5 years' time as a result of this. Is it that there'll be a legal advice centre on every corner, or will we be able to pinpoint a change in the quality of our clients' lives? And if we can pinpoint that, that's what we need to specify today, so we know how to get there. So, in my opinion, what do I think we should do? How can we intervene in this discourse on the shirkers? That's a very broad thing for a group like this. So I'm wondering if maybe the one practical thing or a practical focus we can try, and I'm absolutely not sold on this, I just felt I needed to offer something other than a few questions, was maybe, we know in 2014 local authority funding is really going to be challenged and under threat. So perhaps what we can try and do is make it mandatory that local authorities have to provide some level of advice. Perhaps that local authority and advice can be our target, because in doing that we have to raise all the questions about welfare reform, housing benefit, etc. We have to take on the issues of safety net. We have to challenge this sugar. But we have something practical that we can aim for that isn't saying give us money. So at the end of it, what I would like to leave you with is a series of questions that will lead into the next debate. All of this campaign must feed into and complement the Low Commission and its findings. And so these are the questions. What is the change that we want to effect? How will we know that we've achieved that? Who is going to make this change? Who will be our unexpected allies? What 3 pieces of memorable evidence will we use? We don't want a heap, we only want 3, and it has to be memorable. And whose story are we going to use? We will have to have a client story. And having answered those questions, my last thing to say is, let's have a bit of fun doing it, because basically that's why we're all here. We like this part of the work. Thank you.